Yes,
Finally.
yes.
Now that the government's got everything on it,
No, I don't think they were interested in my phone. But welcome to the big questions.
Okay.
We talk about love, death, sex, religion, and all the big questions worth asking. I'm your host, Robert K. Elder, and today we're talking with Scott Turow, an attorney and author of books like Presumed Innocent and Identical, which is just now out in paperback. The Big Questions is sponsored by Shure, purveyors of professional microphones and headphones. You can check them out at shure.com. That's SHURE.com. And the Big Questions podcast is part of the Sun Times Media Locals podcast network. Scott is also our guest editor for the Evanston Review this issue, and we're now talking in his lovely North Shore home. Scott, welcome.
Thank you.
Hey.
Nice to see you.
Now, you were raised in Oak Park, and then you sort of lived all over the North Shore, Wilmette, Winnetka, Glenview. You went to New Trier High School. So I'm interested in the forces that shaped you along the North Shore. So, what, I know you were editor of your high school newspaper.
I was the editor of the New Trier News, and I grew up in Rogers Park, not Oak Park.
I came from Oak Park, sorry,
Right.
in Rogers Park.
Not an understandable lapse, but anyway. So
yeah, I want sort of a little sort of biographical tour, literally, of the influences along the North Shore, places.
Well, I'll be honest as usual. Right, even though it's not a habit. I grew up in the city, on the north side of the city, and I have to say that my parents moved to Winnetka when I was 13 was actually somewhat traumatic because it was just a much different milieu in those days. And, New Trier was, I came from a city neighborhood where, it was different times. And once I was 10 years old, I was sort of free to go where I wanted as long as the bus or the L could get me there. Suddenly I'm in the suburbs. I'm basically landlocked because there's no real public transportation in those days. I can only get to where my parents will drive me. And, the kids are different. I was not in the junior high school system, which is everybody's sort of social basis at a school like New Trier. I was lonely and ticked off that my parents had moved me out here. And, the affluence, the sort of universal affluence, at least a higher level of affluence than I was accustomed to, was somewhat off-putting. And, the girls with their, circle pins and madras skirts. And so I was not a big fan. And I was, most of this is not the fault of the area or the school, but, it's just sort of my personal package. And I was the usual depressed teenager. So I walked out of New Trier vowing that would be the last time I'd ever set foot inside the building, and naturally then sent 3 children there.
But at what point did you turn around? Not only did you send 3 children there, but you resettled here.
Well, my hope was to live in Evanston. So, my ex preferred to be one town further north. She had good reasons for that, as I said, and but, it's one of those typical things in a marriage that, I lost that one. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure now that my kids wouldn't have preferred that I won, because they reflect on their time at New Trier. I don't hear like, unguarded joy when they talk about their high school experience. Mm-hmm. But again, that's very often natural to the times of life.
I don't think unguarded joy comes for years and years after you've lost several layers of memory.
Right. About high school, I remember again. My ex was somebody who loved high school, and and then the years since the marriage ended, I've dated several people who loved high school, and I'm always at pains to explain that, that's a minority experience. Most people don't love high school. They just don't like being, adolescents.
But you seem to have thrived. Like I said, I read your bio, and the high school remains very proud of you. I saw a little PDF where but where you were the editor in your senior year of the newspaper.
I was,
so you seem to thrive in that environment.
I don't know if this brings to mind Blake, who said that if there's fruit despite the blight, don't give credit to the blight. I wandered into the newspaper, and it certainly was true that I had a natural feeling for it. The newspaper really saved me. I had, a small community that I belonged to, and I loved it. I loved my time working on the New True News, and my girlfriend in high school worked on the newspaper, and sort of my best friend, but it was sort of accidental. I certainly was never a keen teen or a cool kid.
But I just want to revisit my original question. And then when did this start feeling like home? And maybe it was, you chose to come back to Evanston. You could have lived anywhere.
Yeah. Well, I do love Evanston.
Yeah.
And
what in particular? Why?
Well, I love the diversity of the community, and candidly, that to some extent is a response to having lived in other places on the North Shore. I live, without talking too precisely about where I live next door to a tot lot, and I take enormous pleasure as an American that I can look out that window and very often not tell which child belongs to which parents. This is such a diverse community, so happily intermingled, that's you can't look at a kid and say, there are often two or three candidates out there who might be that particular child's parents, and that assumes that they're actually with their birth parents. So, and I like the diversity of Evanston in all ways. The fact that the university's here, you can go to space and hear really good music. There are nice places to eat. The lakefront is spectacular. I bike around the Northwestern campus all the time. When I have to get downtown, I'm close to the city. And I live in, proximity to both the Metra and the RTA. So, it's nice.
Yeah. And I want to turn to your writing a little bit. You've said before that you're a big believer in this theory that authors write only one book. And if that is true for you, what is the theme of that book?
I guess if I understood that completely, I might be writing something different. I think I am writing about the uses and abuses. I think I'm writing about the uses and abuses of power. But that's a guess. But they're just the same sort of assembly of obsessions. You don't expect to be doing anything different. I think that some of that is what is driving me. And I'm doing writing for TV now. I'm working on this young adult book, and I think that's partly an effort to avoid repeating myself. That if you go into slightly different, media, then your own, sort of constant hobby horses have a new way of expressing themselves.
Well, and this book, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, seems more personal thematically than much of your other work, because it's about identical twins, and you've shared before that your sister had been a twin, but the fraternal other twin had died in childbirth. I'm curious about the conversations you may have had with Vicky, your younger sister, about that.
That's a really interesting question, and I've been trying for the last couple of years to engage her on that subject, and she's extremely elusive, and which she has every right to be. But it finally dawned on me about a year ago. I said, I'm doing all this talking about what the death of your twin meant to me. I said, what did it mean to you? And she said to me, that's an interesting question. We'll have to talk about it sometime.
Well, and the thing it meant to you is, in a strange way, you felt like it was your twin. Can you explain that?
Yeah. Well, you have to go, the important biographical fact is that my father was an OBGYN. Mm-hmm. So, and his job was to deliver babies, and of course everybody knows what their father does in a positive way. And so my father delivered healthy, happy babies for, this multitude of families. And somehow, our baby, one of them, didn't come home. So that just seemed really weird to me. And again, being candid, I didn't have a friction-free relationship with my father at any point in my life. And even by the age of 3, I had the sense that something was amiss. And so I think my fantasy was that what this baby had done to die was be like me. And that is, the baby that died was a boy. And so that led to this, again, we're talking about the way 3-year-olds think. That led to this fantasy that the baby was not really my sister's twin, but must have been my twin. And, and I was preoccupied by that thought between, ages, say, 3 and 6.
Yeah.
So I don't think a young child having a fantasy of being an identical twin, of there being another self out there, is completely unusual. But it certainly was the way I grew up for a while.
Mm-hmm. But what was the impact? Was it that you wanted someone like yourself? And again, I'm way more interested in this than most people might be, because I have boy-girl twins. So what was the actual fantasy?
Well, there's a line in Identical where Hal Cronin, who is the sort of antagonist of the Giannis twins, says, "I was always envious of them because they always had someone to be with, someone who would like them, someone who knew them." And I think that's part of it, that, you want to feel you have a place in the world and someone to be close to. And, a twin obviously satisfies that, even though, I did a lot of reading about twins. They often hate each other's guts as often as they feel like they inhabit the same skin. They're, both poles are fairly common.
Yeah. Well, and even, people who have lost twins or a twin who lose the other feel it for their entire lives.
Right.
Elvis Presley was a twin, whose brother did not live. And it was an ache he felt for the rest of his life.
Yeah.
There are always, shades of Cook County in Kendall County, of course. Paul was a star witness in a corrupt judge scandal, which you worked on.
Right.
There's an allusion to a violin player who was dragged by a train, which is a reference to Rachel Barton Pine. And I'm just wondering if any of that sort of thinly veiled reference has ever gotten you in trouble.
Well, it's weird. I met Rachel Pine recently, and I'm not sure I would have included that had I done so. But although there's really no commentary one way or the other about Rachel, and I think in the novel I think it's a male violinist, but whatever. I don't think it's gotten me in trouble yet. I mean, the resemblances are not only gauged enough, but also, these things just serve as inspirations. They're sort of landmarks, so that the case of the violinist who gets dragged by the train becomes the first time that Paul Giannis has a very successful personal injury suit. So they get, to the extent details are recognizable, they get woven in a fairly innocuous way.
Mm-hmm. Well, and this one, this book in particular, at the core of it is a murder that echoes a murder that happened in Kenilworth.
Absolutely.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, this book was just a weird stew of personal things, which you correctly seize upon. The Percy murders. Charles Percy was a candidate for the United States Senate, and he'd run unsuccessfully for governor once before. And while he was out on the campaign trail, someone killed one of his identical twin daughters in a shower of blood and glass in the girl's bedroom in their lakefront mansion, actually, in Kenilworth. And this happened just as I was leaving the North Shore for college. I went off to Amherst College in Massachusetts. And because it was taking place, the first murder in 100 years along the Winnetka Kenilworth lakefront area, it was one of those things that fascinated me. And of course, Percy ended up winning that election, unlike the character in my novel who withdraws from the election. He continued to run. So we'll have to wait a second while the phone rings.
That's all right. That's the beauty of podcasts. So he did not win?
He won.
He won.
He lost for governor, but won for the Senate after his daughter was murdered. He stayed in the election. The election was 6 weeks later, and he stayed in, won, and then, of course, proved to be a very successful and I think pretty good senator. Was reelected a number of times, and I think he beat Paul Douglas and lost to Paul Simon, if I'm not mistaken. And all three of them actually were pretty good senators.
Yeah. Are you aware that this seems to be your most, you call it this sort of personal stew, this seems to be your most personal book in some ways?
Well, I'm not sure I agree with that, but either I have been more honest about the autobiographical sources, which is possible, or you just know me better.
That could be it. That could be it. Or perhaps you just don't see it that way because the other stuff is the other novels were better hidden, perhaps.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I certainly look at a book like Ordinary Heroes, which was really fashioned after the stories my father told about World War II, and that seems really personal, but you're right in the sense that those were my father's stories, not mine.
Sure. Well, and one of the things that we talked about just a little bit ago is how things in your life change, and you have relatively recently been divorced. And I'm just wondering how that has informed the way you write about relationships, because especially in this new book, there's a woman named Even Miller who is struggling with the end of a relationship.
Right. Without commenting on my divorce, it's a fact.
Yeah.
So I've been single for 8 years now. And that's led to a lot of thought about relationships. And, and even as she really brought to mind the experience of a couple of gay friends in particular who wrestled with the issue of coming out and thought that was the whole crisis was, and then, of course, once they came out, they realized this is hardly the end. Relationships are just as tough as coming to terms with who you are. Mm-hmm. And there may be a personal echo in that.
And I just want to return to my original question. It's more just about writing and understanding characters. How do you understand characters differently, having gone through this? And maybe
How do I understand characters?
Or
I think, every...
Or do you have different insight?
I mean, how do you understand characters having raised children?
I think, by the way, that you understand people better when you see them as children, if you know their background.
Oh, that's true. I just had my 65th birthday, and you get up in the morning, your back hurts. The hair is, for the most part, a memory of bygone days. There's no damn reward for getting older except that you know a lot more. And particularly you know a lot more about people, and what happens between them and yourself. I mean, either you actually know more about yourself or you're just under that illusion. But you've had 65 years to think about yourself, so you think you understand yourself. And I feel older and wiser.
But not to beat a dead horse, but do you feel like you understand, like that there was a fundamental shift in understanding for a process I never want to go through?
Yeah. Well, I'll just say yes.
Okay, fair enough. There are parts in this book when you, the author, and your personal opinions shine through. And my favorite one is about exercising the First Amendment rights. And there's a line in here that is great that says, as long as there are 5 clowns on the Supreme Court who think that spending money is a form of unrestricted speech.
Right.
So that is Scott Turow speaking.
It is. I may as well have had a print in the margin author's message.
And the novel is not often a platform for personal opinion, but this seems to be something that is particularly upsetting to you.
It is.
And so why? Can you explore that for me?
I think that it undermines our democracy, and I have a lot of friends whose opinions I value who don't necessarily agree with me, but when the Declaration of Independence declared that all persons are created equal, it had a vision which is fundamental to democracy, that the only way to really run the railroad, to make an inclusive political system, is to say everybody gets equal voice in it. And so it's one person, one vote. Then you come along and say, well, it's one person, one vote, but if you happen to be a billionaire, you can spend whatever you want to influence the political process. Well, that's fundamentally at odds with this notion of equal influence over the government. And that's bad enough as it is, but the doctrinal underpinnings of it, as far as I am concerned, are bullshit.
Mm-hmm. But hasn't it always been, hasn't that always been the case, though? It just seems that the Supreme Court has codified it?
No, it has not always been the case. Corporations have not had the right to contribute to political races, nor have labor unions had the right to make direct contributions.
I was thinking more philosophical, and that is the more power you have, the more influence you have.
Oh, for sure. But we've been going the other way for a long time. We started out in this country where only white men with property could vote in our elections. Right? And slowly every part of that sentence has changed to become more inclusive. White, gone, thank God. Men, gone, thank God. Of property, gone, thank God. Now you turn around and you redo the whole damn thing and say, oh yeah, but if you're rich, you have the right to influence the political process in a way that working people just can't do. oh yeah, it's true, a working person who wants to spend 8 hours on the factory assembly line and then come home and knock on doors at night, as thousands of them do, they have the right to influence things. But it's a lot easier when you can just write a check. And particularly when we were at the point in 1973 of saying, the Congress saying this is all a bad idea, and we're going to dramatically limit campaign contributions and expenditures. This went through Congress. President signed it. And only because the Supreme Court wrote in and said no to it in Buckley versus Vallejo did we avoid a radically different system, and one that limited political contributions and expenditures. And we will get back there. Mm-hmm. I know we will get back there.
And what is the necessary shift? Is it literally 5 new people on the Supreme Court?
Yeah, no, it's 1 new person on the Supreme Court, because time and place and manner restrictions on speech are part of our constitutional doctrine. Dancing naked is also a form of expression, but you can't do it in the middle of this block. You can't do it in most establishments. And the idea that there's something so important about spending money that you can conflate it with direct advocacy is misbegotten to begin with, as far as I am concerned. It's like saying walking for political purposes is the same thing as direct advocacy. Well, no, it's not. It's not. And that means that if this is the same thing as saying if I'm walking to go to a Democratic Party headquarters here in Evanston, I can walk through the homes of the people who are between me and in Democratic Party headquarters. No, I can't. There are other laws that interfere with my right to walk to political events. And the idea that spending money for political purposes should not be subject to any restriction is just nonsense to me.
Yeah. Well, in this age where, corporations are people, you have called Amazon a very special kind of person, which is Darth Vader. You said this years ago, and I'm just wondering, if it's time to either revisit or update that metaphor.
Well, I don't know about updating the metaphor, but I will say to those who thought that I was being a little hysterical, who looks like a prophet now? Amazon is busily engaged in this war with Hachette Books, apparently over the percentage of ebook revenues that each will receive. Now, I have a horse in this race because I am a Hachette author, but everybody knows that the model that's being developed between Hachette and Amazon will end up being the one that every other publisher is forced to follow. The big part of this story that nobody in the press, frankly, has been following is that not only are the Hachette authors getting screwed, but all authors are in peril because ebook royalties are based on a percentage of the net, 25% of the net. So that if the publisher's net goes down, which is what Amazon's goal is, 25% of that decrease will be paid out of the author's shares of the revenue. So Amazon is really acting not only as an antagonist to the Hachette authors whose books are either they're not being discounted, they're not being delivered promptly, they won't take pre-orders, for example, for the paperback of Identical. But they are also overall trying to reduce authors' share of revenue as well as the publishers, which is why the authors end up holding hands with their publishers in this instance. All of this, though, is to give the lie to the notion that Amazon is out for the good of literature or to offer lower consumer prices. The price of Identical, the hardcover, has risen 40% on Amazon since this affray began. They have undue market power, and they are wielding it in their usual ruthless way. Amazon and the publishers and the authors all ought to be friends. And this is Jeff Bezos' philosophy. He thinks that, ruthless capitalism is good. Maybe he's right, but I don't see it. I don't see it as being, who else but somebody with undue market power looks at their customers and says, go buy the book somewhere else, I don't give a damn. And who else but a company that is being sponsored by Wall Street and allowed to lose money? I can run a business and lose money for year after year after year. It doesn't take any special genius to create a money-losing enterprise. And again, one of the reasons that they dare take this approach to thumb their nose at their customers, not to mention their suppliers, is because they don't care about making a profit. Wall Street hasn't forced that on them.
And they, depending on where you read, they're responsible for 30 or 35% of the book market. Is it because...
I think it's closer to 50%.
So my question is it because it is not more than 50% that they're not in danger of sort of any monopoly charges?
Don't ask me, because I think that this latest episode is clearly evidence that they believe that their customers have nowhere else to go. For one thing, they tether their customers to them through Amazon Prime, right? So they can punish, first of all, the disputes about ebooks, but they are punishing Hachette not simply with ebooks, but rather with the physical books. Why do they do that? They do that because they have tethered their customers to them, so through Amazon Prime. People have paid $79 in advance for free shipping. And so when Amazon says to them, oh, go buy it somewhere else, they don't really mean it. They have their fingers crossed when they say it, because they've already scooped up the $79 or $99 that people pay for Prime. And they know, Amazon knows they're not going to go anywhere else. So, that's undue market power. And
yes, they have a phone now?
Yeah, they have a phone, apparently.
Yeah, a mobile phone that creates a more intimate relationship between the Prime membership and the bookstore. And
I'll bet.
Yeah.
I'll bet.
And full disclosure here, so my publisher also had been in conflict. IPG had been in conflict.
Right.
So
They sure have been.
So that's my note here.
Look, you got to give Amazon credit for a lot of things. Their software is brilliant. They really have built a better mousetrap in many ways, and they deserve the success that comes from that. They do not deserve the success that comes from predatory pricing, which is what they did with ebooks for many years, nor do they deserve the success that comes from the kind of monopoly power that they've begun to exert in the book business.
Coming back a little bit to the book business and your life as a attorney / writer. Before we were just talking about people who sort of pop up out of the woodwork, and before there's a piece in the book where you talk about the prosecutors not getting everything right. There's always one thing you don't get right.
Right.
At
least.
Yes. And I had asked you in a previous interview about, interviewing somebody who you were, somebody who you had prosecuted just so you could have all your questions answered. But you said, no, recently somebody I convicted reached out. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah. I mean, I won't identify who it was, but this was somebody who we convicted and then cooperated against his attorney. it was my experience more than once that, a lot of criminal defendants are like, I didn't do it, and why are they picking on me? And those people don't tend to form positive relationships with their prosecutors. But there are people who take responsibility and say, I did something wrong. It's very easy for prosecutors to form pleasant relationships with those people. In this case, this man wanted me to represent him again. He had gotten in trouble yet again in the same way that he had gotten in trouble before, and I was like, why in that? He says, don't tell me that. He says, don't tell me I shouldn't have done it. I already know that. And he said, I knew what I was doing. I lived an upright life for 9 years. And I think what he was basically saying to me was I missed the excitement. I missed the excitement of being a criminal. And, but he's a very smart man. He's a really bright guy, and he knows what he's doing. And, I liked him. I liked him before, and I like him now. Yeah. Weird as that is for somebody to hear me say that, I sent the guy to the penitentiary for, I think he ended up doing 7 years. And I like him, but I do. He broke the rules, and he knew what the rules were, and he took the risk. He was very funny when I talked to him. I said, you're going to go back to prison. He said, no.
Well, it's just amazing to me that sort of relationship can exist, because I think about, like Bob Woodward, in his later years, having dinner with Haldeman and all these people who he helped, send to prison, basically. Right. It's amazing that is even pleasant dinner conversation.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you in the law, you often have, end up having decent relationships with, people you've tried cases against and been angrier than hell with. Yeah. I don't think she'd mind my saying this, but, Nan Nolan, who's federal judge, she's now retired, but Nan is a dear friend. But we started out, we got to know each other in a case where we both had incredibly strong feelings that the other one was doing the wrong thing. I didn't think she was wrong for defending the guy, but I thought her client, who was a South African gun runner, was perpetuating an evil regime. I was right about that. And she felt that her client, who had been lured into the United States in order to be prosecuted, had been dealt with unfairly. And obviously, she was right that he was deceived. But neither one of us saw that very objectively. All I saw was that the guy was trying to prop up an evil regime, and she saw that he'd been dealt with unfairly. But we ended up becoming really dear friends. But not then. Not when we walked out of that courtroom.
Well, I think that gives us all hope. Now, you mentioned writing for TV. Can you discuss what that is?
Yeah, sure. I think this has been in the trades. I did a pilot along with my friend Mike Robe last year for TNT, and I think everybody agrees we wrote a really good script. It did not fit the needs of a changing industry, and television is in an immense transition, which frankly is a very good one for a novelist, because TV is becoming more novelistic. If you look at things like Breaking Bad or True Detective, and I'm also working with the people who, from Anonymous Content, who put together True Detective originally. It's a good time for novelists in the land of television. So I'm working on a new proposal for TNT. I had a meeting there 2 weeks ago, and we'll be back in L.A.
And TNT also did the Innocent miniseries.
They did.
Yeah.
They did.
Yeah.
They'd made the film of Innocent. So Mike and I went in and talked to the head of programming there, and we're about to present another idea to them. It's I like what's going on in television right now. Series television, as I said, is becoming pretty serious art form. That's not to say that this is a new development. Things like Hill Street Blues or West Wing or St. Elsewhere, or I can name China Beach. There have been a lot of great television series that have had, huge novelistic virtues, especially psychological realism and deep character development. But it's becoming more commonplace, and Breaking Bad right now is the sort of archetype that was just absolutely superb drama.
You're also breaking into new genres is not the right word.
Yeah, I think that's okay.
New markets. So I hear you have a young adult novel in the works as well, and inspired by your grandfather.
Right, completely true.
And in fact, in this house here, you keep a little memento from him on your desk.
More than one, but
particularly there's something.
Yeah, there's a shaving mug of my grandfather's that's on my desk, and there's actually, as you trudge up the stairs, a wonderful picture of him taken by my ex-wife. He was the man of my life at a time when, when I needed him, which is a friend of mine who's a shrink, like to say that every adolescent needs an adult to help the adolescent grow up, and that adult cannot be one of the adolescent's parents. Mm-hmm. So my grandfather was that person for me. And, he was just this smelly, grumpy old man till I was about 13. And I got the measles right before my bar mitzvah. And in those days, there was this belief that exposure to the light would, while you had measles would cause you to go blind. Whether there's any truth to it, I don't know. But it led to this sort of romantic existence in a dark room. And my grandfather came and sat down in the dark room and just began to tell me the story of his life. And that went on for days while I was sick. And sort of when, we raised the blinds again, I was sort of in love with him. And a love that never left me. And everyone else in the family detested this man. Both of his children, his wife, and I loved him dearly, and he loved me. And that, the idea that, of an elderly person who finally figured out how to have a loving and successful relationship with somebody seems to me to be just a really neat literary motif. So I've always intended to write this story, but the birth of my own grandson has really propelled this. So I have a first draft done, and I've put it aside since both editor and agent have told me that there needs to be a second draft. And I kind of get what was wrong with it. Yeah. And I will go back to it. But I will finish it.
Well, to have such a powerful influence in your life, did you realize, this thematic thing that you just explained to me, but at 13, did you realize, he had very complicated relationships and was a, perhaps very complicated man, but we seem to have this window? Or did you only develop this later?
Well, the fact that nobody else liked him probably made him more attractive to a 13-year-old, because
he was punk rock, basically.
It's like you think of yourself as an outcast, so he was an outcast too. Mm. But he was honest in the way that other adults weren't. And, that made him precious to me.
Yeah. And wrapping up here a little bit, part of your guest editorship here in Evanston is you champion a charity. And can you tell me that charity and why you chose it?
Well, I really, and I'm going to be very straight from the shoulder. I don't like being the, honoree at the disease of the week luncheons or dinners. And so I typically shunned this role, but I was asked to be the honoree at an event that benefits the Friends of the American Hebrew University in Jerusalem. This is the Chicago chapter. And I agreed despite my natural reluctance, for a couple of principal reasons. One, my nephew, Robert Marcus, went to the Hebrew University in Jerusalem for a while, and it proved a pivotal experience in his own life. He is now a special assistant to the president for the Mideast, and Robert's education about the Middle East began at the Hebrew University. So, having seen its enormously beneficial effect for Robert, I feel a certain gratitude to the university. The award I'm getting is named for Jerry Solovey, who was another longtime North Shore resident, and the chairman at Jenner and Block. And I got to know Jerry very, very, even before I was licensed to practice law. I had met Jerry. He'd come into the U.S. Attorney's Office on the case. I'd never quite seen, in my short experience, never seen anybody else, be a lawyer like this, because he was laughing in a really jovial way as he told the prosecutors, what terrible mistakes they had made in a case against his client. And he wasn't laughing as if he didn't mean it. He was laughing as if to say, well, the criminal process is all part of the human comedy, and we all know that we make mistakes, and these just happen to be the mistakes that you guys made in this case. So he was being very good-natured about it. I was really impressed, even though I knew that everything he was saying was complete malarkey. But because we had met, he then began courting me very quickly, telling me that I shouldn't go to work in the U.S. Attorney's Office even after I'd started there, and that I had to come to work for him at Jenner and Block. And one of his partners had told me point blank that would be a terrible mistake, that if I had the opportunity to go to the U.S. Attorney's Office, I should do that. And if I ever, hope to work at Jenner and Block, I could try for that later in my life. And I, very cheerfully told Jerry that his partners had advised against that, not to mention the fact that I was working for one of his dearest partners, Tom Sullivan, who was now U.S. Attorney. But we formed, I think, a pretty nice friendship, and that persisted through the rest of Jerry's life, and was sitting behind Jerry and Kathleen on an airplane, actually, only a few months before he died. So, and I always like to say that one of the reasons that I've continued to practice law is because I've met more great people in that profession than I think I might have in many others. And by that I mean people of real moral vision, and great capacities that they have figured out how to utilize. And Jerry goes in that class. My, former partner Harold Shapiro, who was the chairman at Sonnenschein when I was hired there, is another lawyer, who I just think of as being really extraordinary people who did great things with their lives as lawyers, and made a difference. Made a difference in a lot of lives as a result.
And just because you led me there and we talked about your grandfather, is there a central figure who fits that for you? We also talked about Wallace Stegner, somebody who had a central impact, could be on you as a lawyer, as a mentor, as a, fellow writer, somebody who had just this profound formative influence on you.
There have been a number. There was my grandfather first. There was Tilly Olson, who was my writing teacher at both Amherst and then later at Stanford, and in that capacity, two other professors there, David Sofield and Leo Marx. Wally certainly had more influence on me than I was aware of at the time, and his colleague Dick Scowcroft. Nobody had more of a formative impact on me as a lawyer than, my first boss, Tom Sullivan, who was the U.S. attorney, for 4 years between his long stint at Jenner and Block. And, I turned on the television a couple of years ago, and there was a hearing of the Senate Judiciary Committee on Guantanamo. And Tom had ostensibly been called as a witness, but there he was reading out, I think it was Lindsey Graham, just absolutely from the witness chair, as he did in many courtrooms, just taking control of the proceedings. And although he was supposed to be the one answering questions, there he was in charge yet again. He's a great lawyer and a wonderful man, and he taught me an enormous amount about practicing law. And, I was very privileged that when I came into the U.S. Attorney's Office, I was assigned to the trial of William J. Scott, who was the sitting Attorney General of Illinois, and that really meant that for a year and a half, I sat for many, many hours at Tom's side, while he, criticized my work and told me what I was doing wrong, and as well as every now and then doing right. But he was an emblem of integrity as a public official. And again, another one of those great human beings who was practicing law and using his talents to improve, either the life of the community or that of, his specific clients.
And is that goal both for you as a writer and perhaps as an attorney, is that something that informs, I guess, your moral code or your direction? Do you hope to accomplish, that amount of impact?
Adrienne, my beloved girlfriend, likes to talk about leaving the campsite a little cleaner. And I think that's a worthy goal for all humans. And, I don't, I have to admit, I met the other day with a young man named Jared Adams, who's been written about quite a bit recently because he's an exoneree, did 7 years in the Wisconsin prison system, and is now about to graduate law school. And he got a very, very raw deal and was convicted on basically no evidence at all of a crime he didn't commit. And now he's a year away from becoming a member of the bar. He told me that he'd always wanted to meet me because he'd read Presumed Innocent right after he was convicted, and somehow it gave him hope. Now, I didn't write Presumed Innocent to give Jared Adams hope. I wrote it, for myself, first of all, just to fashion my experience into a form that I thought would, make my imagination and imaginings comprehensible and involving to other people. So I'm a little loath to say that being a novelist is a form of aid to others in quite the way that, some of my pro bono legal work has been. It's not. But I'm glad that it's been meaningful to as many people as it has been. And you certainly hope when you write that you're doing something that's going to be moving and involving to other people.
Right. Well, you've also done nonfiction, about
have.
anti-death penalty books and that sort of thing. So it was a question not necessarily aimed at your writing career, but just your life trajectory.
Yeah, I mean, look, what are we here for? To love people and help them.
Yeah.
I mean, that about sums it up, right? To love and be loved, and to be helpful to humanity in general.
I think that's a good place to end. You've been listening to the Big Questions podcast. It's part of the Sun Times Media Local Podcast Network. Our music is by Hernan Sanchez. Scott, thanks for joining us.
Sure. Thank you, Rob.